The frantic emergency call cut through the freezing darkness in the early morning hours of February 14, 2002. When local police rushed through the heavy security gates of an ultra-exclusive New Jersey neighborhood, they were not stepping into a standard crime scene. According to public real estate records, this was a sprawling, custom-built fortress measuring nearly 30,000 square feet, the lavish private domain of professional basketball superstar Jayson Williams. Inside, the palatial estate resembled a dark psychological thriller. On the floor of the luxurious home lay a 55-year-old limousine driver named Costas Christofi, whose life had just come to a violent, tragic end. The initial, chillingly calm statement given by the towering athlete to the arriving officers was that the hired driver had suddenly and inexplicably ended his own life right there in the middle of the room. It was an explanation that immediately set off massive warning bells for the seasoned detectives. Why would a working man, simply hired for a routine late-night driving job, make such a permanent, devastating choice in the home of a total stranger? As investigative reporters would later note, the atmosphere in that room was suffocatingly tense and heavily layered with glaring contradictions. But the ultimate turning point occurred just a few hours later, when crime scene investigators meticulously analyzing the area noticed a highly suspicious detail regarding the exact angle and resting position of the recovered weapon. A single, undeniable physical discrepancy that instantly transformed the beloved sports icon from a shocked witness into the prime suspect of a massive criminal investigation. To truly understand how Jayson Williams ended up at the center of that devastating night in his mansion, we have to rewind the clock to the very beginning of his journey. Born in 1968, he grew up navigating the unforgiving, hardscrabble streets of Queens, New York. According to detailed biographical profiles from his early professional career, this environment was a place where aggression was not just a difficult personality trait, but an absolute necessity for daily survival. He learned early on that physical dominance and intimidation commanded immediate respect from his peers. This raw, unbridled energy seamlessly transitioned onto the basketball court during his highly publicized time at St. John's University. As meticulously documented in the official collegiate athletic archives, he was an absolute force of nature, consistently averaging impressive double-digit rebounds per game. But what exactly drove this relentless, almost frantic hunger for the ball? Was it pure athletic ambition and a desire to escape poverty, or a deeper, uncontrolled internal fury desperately looking for an outlet? Those spectacular numbers masked a rapidly growing internal turbulence. While the packed arenas cheered for his fierce elbows and fearless leaps under the rim, those closest to the locker room started noticing alarming behavioral patterns off the hardwood. Extensive interviews with former classmates and local sports reporters from that specific era painted a deeply concerning picture of a young man who simply could not switch off his on-court hostility once the final buzzer sounded. The fame and recognition were growing exponentially, but the foundational cracks in his character were already showing to anyone willing to look closely. And the ultimate test of his volatile temperament came on the night of the professional draft in 1990, when one prominent franchise took a massive financial gamble on his talent, only to hit their absolute breaking point in record time over a highly publicized altercation. The transition to the professional leagues is supposed to be a glorious dream come true, a moment of pure triumph. But for Jayson Williams, it immediately turned into a bizarre and chaotic spectacle. Based on the official league draft protocols, the pivotal night took place on June 27, 1990. The Phoenix Suns utilized a highly valuable first-round pick to secure the promising forward, hoping his aggressive rebounding style would push their roster toward a championship run. However, a completely shocking twist occurred almost immediately behind the scenes. According to front-page stories published in major sports newspapers the very next morning, Jayson Williams was abruptly traded to the Philadelphia 76ers on that exact same day. Why on earth would an elite club immediately discard their top highly scouted prospect before he even had the chance to put on their official jersey? The whispered answers echoing in the private corridors of the sports arenas pointed directly to his notoriously uncontrollable temper. High-ranking front office executives were reportedly terrified of his rapidly deteriorating reputation. Serious rumors circulated about his frequent involvement in late-night skirmishes and a blatant aggressive disregard for coaching authority. He was quickly earning the undeniable label of a severe liability, someone who brought unnecessary destructive chaos to any professional organization. As seasoned sports analysts wrote in their columns at the time, his immense physical talent was constantly overshadowed by his explosive, unpredictable nature whenever he stepped outside the arena. He was a walking public relations disaster just waiting to happen. The Philadelphia management arrogantly thought they could tame his wild spirit, believing the strictly structured environment of a professional franchise would finally cool his fiery outbursts. But their blind optimism was severely misplaced, because by the time the fall of 1992 rolled around, a chaotic brawl in Chicago would force law enforcement to officially record Jayson Williams' name in connection to a deeply troubling, violent offense away from the basketball court. The dark reputation of Jayson Williams was not merely a creation of hostile sports media, but a reality firmly grounded in police paperwork. According to the official Chicago police reports filed in 1992, a highly disturbing altercation erupted in a local bar involving a broken mug and serious allegations of physical assault. This was not a simple misunderstanding between late-night patrons. The documentation described a chaotic scene where the towering athlete allegedly lost complete control of his volatile temper. But why did a professional athlete, earning substantial amounts of money, risk his entire career over a petty argument? Was the immense pressure of the league already breaking his spirit, or was this a terrifying glimpse into a deeply rooted behavioral issue? As sports investigative journalists noted in their detailed exposés of that era, the Philadelphia franchise front office was desperately scrambling to contain the rapidly growing public relations nightmare. According to leaked confidential National Basketball Association memorandums from that specific period, Jayson Williams was hit with significant financial fines and strict disciplinary actions in a frantic attempt to salvage the team's public image. He was quickly becoming the ultimate bad boy of the league, a player who undeniably sold tickets with his sheer aggression but terrified the management behind closed doors. Every single time he stepped off the court, team executives held their collective breath, wondering if another frantic phone call from local law enforcement was imminent. The situation inside the locker room grew increasingly toxic, forcing the Philadelphia management to make a permanent, drastic decision regarding their highly volatile asset. Ultimately, the front office decided to completely cut ties and dump his contract, a strategic move executed in the autumn of 1992 that ironically paved the way for Jayson Williams to secure unimaginable, record-breaking millions. Sometimes a drastic change of scenery is exactly what a struggling talent needs to unlock his true, terrifying potential on the court. The transaction that sent Jayson Williams to the New Jersey Nets during the 1992 to 1993 season was initially viewed as a massive gamble by seasoned sports commentators. However, according to the official historical statistics of the National Basketball Association, this was the exact moment he finally found his ultimate calling under the basket. He transformed himself into an absolute monster of the paint, specializing in the grueling, physically punishing art of securing the basketball after missed shots. But what was the true hidden cost of this nightly physical warfare against the biggest, strongest men in the world? As detailed in the official league yearbooks from those fiercely competitive seasons, his offensive rebounding numbers skyrocketed, eventually making him the undeniable statistical leader of the league in that highly demanding category. In published interviews from former coaching staff, it was repeatedly noted that Jayson Williams treated every single game like a literal battle for physical survival, absorbing devastating elbows, suffering broken noses, and playing through agonizingly dislocated fingers. He embraced the physical pain, turning his battered body into a weapon of mass destruction on the hardwood. The devoted fans absolutely adored his blue-collar work ethic, completely unaware of the heavy psychological toll this nightly physical trauma was extracting from his mind. He was pushing his massive frame far beyond normal human limits, relying on an almost dangerous level of adrenaline to simply get out of bed every single morning. This relentless, punishing style of play rightfully elevated him to the rare status of an elite superstar by 1998. But the agonizing physical consequences would soon force him to seek out increasingly reckless and dangerous methods to temporarily numb his hidden pain. The 1997 to 1998 season represented the absolute pinnacle of professional achievement for the once troubled power forward. According to the official broadcast logs and league archives from February 1998, Jayson Williams proudly stepped onto the illuminated court to participate in the highly coveted All-Star game, cementing his legacy among the absolute best players on the planet. He had seemingly completely reinvented himself from a reckless bar-fighting brawler into a mature, deeply respected veteran presence. But was this polished, smiling public persona entirely genuine, or just a carefully constructed media mask designed to maximize his upcoming financial leverage? The numbers he produced on the court were simply undeniable. The official statistical ledgers from that specific season confirmed he was pulling down a staggering career-high average of over 13 rebounds per game. In the glowing profiles published by major sports magazines that winter, reporters continuously noted his charismatic charm, his million-dollar smile, and his impressive philanthropic efforts in the local community. He was the feel-good redemption story that the league desperately wanted to promote to a massive global audience. The television cameras captured a wealthy, handsome athlete living the ultimate American dream, surrounded by adoring crowds and highly lucrative endorsement deals. Yet those closest to his inner circle whispered about the staggering contrast between the confident superstar on television and the deeply exhausted, physically broken man hiding inside his fortress-like mansion after the stadium lights went dark. Riding this massive wave of unprecedented popularity and statistical dominance, a historic document was placed on his agent's desk in the summer of 1998, containing a specific set of numbers that would completely sever his final fragile connection to ordinary reality. According to the official financial ledgers of the National Basketball Association, the offseason of 1998 brought a historic windfall to the rebounding king. The public contract announcements from that period confirmed a staggering figure: an agreement worth $86 million spread out over 6 long years. But what happens to a man's psyche when he is suddenly handed that kind of absolute, undeniable financial power? Does it buy peace of mind, or does it merely attract an army of dangerous enablers and false friends? In the investigative reports published by financial sports analysts, it was noted that this astronomical wealth completely altered the entire ecosystem surrounding Jayson Williams. He was no longer just an athlete. He was a walking, breathing corporation. The sprawling mansion, the endless late-night parties, the fleet of luxury vehicles, all of it was fueled by this massive, sudden influx of cash. Yet behind the velvet ropes and the flashing cameras, a terrifying sense of invincibility was rapidly taking root in his mind. As former associates mentioned in various media retrospectives, the money created an invisible, impenetrable shield around him, a private bubble where the normal rules of society simply no longer applied. He felt completely untouchable, surrounded constantly by a tight circle of yes-men who would never dare question the massive man signing their paychecks. However, fate has a very cruel way of balancing the scales. He was supposed to earn every single penny of that $86 million deal by physically dominating the paint for the next decade. But he would never get the chance to fulfill that highly lucrative promise because on April 1st, 1999, a sickening sound echoed across the hardwood that would instantly turn his massive contract into a golden cage. The arena was packed, the television lights were bright, and everything seemed like just another routine, highly physical night of professional basketball. According to the official game calendar of the league, the specific date was April 1st, 1999. Jayson Williams went up for a routine, aggressive play near the basket against the Atlanta Hawks, colliding violently with his own teammate in midair. And then came the sound, a horrific echoing snap that was broadcast directly into millions of living rooms across the country. According to the medical reports widely cited by the sports press the very next morning, the diagnosis was absolutely catastrophic. A severe, complex fracture of the right tibia and fibula. But why did such a seemingly standard collision result in an injury so devastating that it required heavy surgical steel to repair? Was his massive body finally collapsing under the immense, accumulated pressure of his notoriously brutal playing style? In the medical files referenced by investigative reporters, it was heavily noted that the damage went far beyond a simple broken bone. It was a career-shattering physical trauma that required multiple complex surgeries and triggered severe, agonizing infections. He spent long, agonizing months confined to a hospital bed, helplessly watching his beloved team move on without him. The physical agony was immense, but the psychological torture of losing his entire identity was undeniably far worse. He was no longer the invincible gladiator of the paint. He was a broken man heavily reliant on strong painkillers just to make it through the day. Faced with the harsh, undeniable reality of his shattered leg, Jayson Williams made a deeply painful public announcement in June of the year 2000, officially confirming his retirement from the sport, a specific date that marked the beginning of a terrifyingly empty chapter in his life. Walking away from the court is universally known as the hardest transition for any elite athlete, but on the surface, Jayson Williams seemed to have figured it out perfectly. Based on the official network press releases distributed in the year 2000, he seamlessly transitioned into a highly lucrative, high-profile role as a lead studio analyst for the NBC television network. Millions of loyal viewers tuned in every single week to see the towering, charismatic former star wearing impeccably tailored suits, breaking down plays with his signature, confident smile. However, what was really hiding behind that flawless, expensive television makeup? Was the charming broadcast personality just a desperate, carefully constructed illusion, masking a rapid descent into the shadows? As detailed in the comprehensive background checks later conducted by investigative journalists, his private life behind the gates of his estate was spiraling completely out of control. In the inventory logs later compiled from police search warrants, it was noted that his sprawling mansion housed a massive, chillingly extensive collection of firearms, including highly specialized and rare hunting pieces. He was a man deeply struggling with severe, chronic physical pain from his ruined leg and a terrifying lack of daily purpose, attempting to fill the massive void left by professional basketball with an increasingly dangerous fascination with weaponry and late-night drinking. Those beautiful custom-made suits hid a broken, exhausted athlete who could not sleep, a man who wandered the endless, quiet halls of his massive palace surrounded by cold steel. This terrifying personal arsenal sat quietly locked inside the glass display cabinets of his home for years, waiting patiently until the fateful evening of February 13th, 2002, when a simple charity dinner would finally set the stage for a complete nightmare. The evening started with the best of intentions, a high-profile philanthropic event designed to raise money and goodwill, but it would inevitably end in unimaginable sorrow. According to the collected restaurant receipts and detailed witness statements from the evening of February 13th, 2002, Jayson Williams was out with a close-knit group of friends in New York City. They needed reliable transportation back to his massive New Jersey estate, so they made a simple, seemingly insignificant, logistical decision. Based on the meticulously reviewed accounting records of a local transportation service, the group hired a luxury vehicle driven by a hard-working 55-year-old man named Costas Christofi. But why did a completely standard transaction between a wealthy celebrity and a professional driver suddenly evolve into a deeply personal late-night invitation? Was the former athlete desperately seeking an audience to fill the massive, echoing halls of his empty mansion? Or was it just the liquid courage of a long, festive night out doing the talking? As extensively documented by investigative reporters who later retraced the exact timeline of the evening, the ride back from Manhattan was reportedly loud, joyous, and incredibly relaxed. Christofi, simply doing his job and providing excellent service, likely had absolutely no idea about the volatile, deeply troubled nature of the famous man sitting in the back seat. He was just a regular guy trying to earn an honest paycheck on a cold winter night. The luxury vehicle finally pulled through the heavy security gates of the sprawling rural estate at around 2 in the morning on February 14th, an arrival time that would officially mark the beginning of a relentless legal nightmare for the host. Stepping inside the legendary athlete's home was supposed to be a thrilling, once-in-a-lifetime experience for the unsuspecting driver. Once the group was safely inside the sprawling compound, the highly energetic host immediately launched into a grand, late-night tour of his luxurious, custom-built domain. Based on the reconstructed timeline compiled by seasoned law enforcement officials, this chaotic, unstructured wandering through the palatial home occurred somewhere between 2 o'clock and 2:40 in the morning. He was proudly showcasing his vast wealth, his various sporting trophies, and his meticulously curated private collections to a highly captive audience. According to the official list of interrogated individuals in the public case files, there were at least 3 key witnesses present from the athlete's personal circle of acquaintances, all trailing behind him as the impromptu tour continued deep into the house. But what exactly shifts a harmless, boastful walk around a giant house into a highly dangerous, life-altering situation? Was the host completely oblivious to basic safety protocols, or did the overwhelming need to impress his guests simply override all rational judgment? As journalists noted in their extensive coverage of the subsequent trial, the atmosphere in the room was heavily influenced by the consumption of adult beverages, severely lowering inhibitions and clouding basic common sense. In a fateful, deeply misguided attempt to show off his ultimate prized possessions, the massive former basketball star led his small group of tired guests directly to his heavy glass display cabinets. He reached inside and casually pulled out a beautifully crafted, highly dangerous double-barreled shotgun, a sudden, careless motion that would forever lock his name to a devastating tragedy. The sheer, terrifying weight of a loaded firearm should always command absolute respect and caution, especially in a crowded room. But that critical rule was catastrophically ignored. The weapon in question was not a simple toy or a decorative prop. According to the comprehensive ballistics reports filed by state forensic experts, it was a highly powerful, beautifully manufactured Browning 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun. The host was casually handling the heavy steel and polished wood, treating it more like an impressive conversation piece than a lethal instrument. And then, in a fraction of a second, the entire atmosphere of the room shattered completely. As heavily detailed in the conclusions drawn by mechanical weapons specialists, the devastating discharge occurred without a direct, intentional pull of the trigger, happening instead at the exact precise moment the massive athlete aggressively snapped the heavy breech closed. The deafening roar of the 12-gauge blast instantly filled the lavish room, and the lethal charge struck the 55-year-old driver directly in the chest. How does a man, specifically trained in the safe, responsible handling of expensive hunting equipment, allow such a catastrophic, reckless failure of basic firearm safety to happen in his own home? Was it a horrifying, one-in-a-million mechanical malfunction, or the tragic, inevitable result of treating dangerous weapons like late-night party tricks. According to the sworn, deeply emotional testimonies of the severely traumatized guests, the immediate aftermath was a scene of absolute, paralyzing panic and sheer terror. However, instead of immediately rushing to the phone to beg emergency medical personnel to save the critically wounded man's life, the panicked host began barking out a series of chilling, calculated commands that would quickly form the absolute core of the prosecution's massive case. The immediate aftermath of the deafening blast inside the luxurious estate was not marked by frantic efforts to save a man, but rather by a chilling, calculated sequence of events. Based on the sworn witness testimonies provided under oath during the subsequent legal proceedings, the towering host did not dial for emergency medical assistance. Instead, he engaged in a shocking attempt to completely rewrite the narrative of that tragic night. The official crime scene inspection protocols meticulously detailed an elaborate, desperate effort to destroy vital physical evidence before law enforcement arrived. But what possesses a beloved public figure to instantly transform a horrifying accident into a convoluted, cynical cover-up? Was it the sheer, blinding panic of a man realizing his multi-million-dollar empire was instantly vanishing? Or a deeply ingrained belief that his massive wealth and celebrity status could somehow magically erase reality? According to the prosecuting attorneys, the former athlete frantically wiped his own fingerprints from the polished wood of the shotgun. In a deeply disturbing maneuver, he then allegedly attempted to place the heavy weapon directly into the hands of the victim, aiming to construct a false narrative of a sudden, voluntary departure from this world. Furthermore, the terrified guests were reportedly ordered to remove their own stained clothing to hide any physical trace of the tragic event. He was directing a macabre theatrical production right in the middle of his sprawling, custom-built mansion, desperately hoping the arriving officers would blindly believe his fabricated story. However, when the flashing red and blue lights finally illuminated his driveway, the former superstar delivered his prepared performance, completely unaware that he had forgotten one incredibly tiny, microscopic detail that forensic experts would easily discover on the weapon's grip by the very next morning. Seasoned law enforcement professionals are rarely fooled by amateur theatrical performances, especially when the physical evidence screams a completely different story. The initial hours of the massive investigation inside the New Jersey estate quickly unraveled the host's carefully constructed narrative. According to the comprehensive forensic medical reports filed by state specialists, a crucial, undeniable piece of the puzzle instantly destroyed the theory of a voluntary departure. The mandatory tests conducted to detect chemical gunshot residue on the victim's hands returned an absolutely negative result. But how could a man supposedly utilize a heavy 12-gauge hunting weapon on himself without leaving a single microscopic trace of the chemical discharge on his own skin? This glaring impossibility, combined with the bizarre, physically impossible downward trajectory of the blast, instantly put the investigators on high alert. As detailed in the extensive public prosecutor documents outlining the timeline of the investigation, the detectives immediately separated the traumatized guests and began applying immense psychological pressure. The bewildered witnesses, who had just experienced the most terrifying night of their lives, were trapped between their loyalty to a powerful, wealthy friend and the absolute, terrifying reality of facing serious obstruction charges themselves. Unsurprisingly, the fragile wall of silence did not hold for very long. Legal records confirm that two key witnesses eventually secured highly protective plea deals in exchange for total unfiltered immunity, breaking down in the interrogation rooms and finally telling the horrifying truth about the cover-up. Armed with these devastating sworn confessions, the authorities prepared to make a massive, highly public move by the end of February 2002, and the astronomical financial figure demanded by the judge would finally reveal the crushing weight of the situation. The absolute dizzying speed at which a gilded multi-million-dollar life can completely disintegrate is truly a terrifying spectacle to witness. By the final week of February 2002, the heavy, undeniable hammer of justice officially came down on the former rebounding champion. According to the unsealed court orders from that highly chaotic period, Jayson Williams was formally charged with severe offenses, including reckless actions resulting in a fatal outcome and multiple serious counts of attempting to obstruct justice. The presiding judge set a massive, staggering bail amount of exactly $250,000, a specific, undeniable financial anchor that officially signaled the end of his untouchable celebrity status. But how does an idolized superstar process the surreal, jarring transition from signing autographs to standing in a sterile courtroom facing decades behind bars? The public backlash was immediate, deafening, and absolutely merciless. Based on the widely circulated public statements released by the broadcasting network's senior management, his highly lucrative, prestigious television contract with NBC was officially and permanently terminated within mere days of the formal arrest. The golden smile that once charmed millions of dedicated basketball fans was instantly wiped from the national airwaves. The sprawling rural estate, once a symbol of his ultimate triumph over poverty, was now completely besieged by aggressive fleets of satellite trucks, eager paparazzi, and relentless investigative reporters. He was transformed overnight from a universally beloved sports icon into a complete pariah, entirely isolated inside his massive fortress. Yet the fight for his freedom was only just beginning, because the grueling preparation for the highly anticipated trial would take 2 excruciatingly long years, giving his extremely expensive defense team enough time to build a phenomenal, high-stakes legal strategy centered entirely around the microscopic mechanical defect of one very specific steel lock. The spring of 2004 marked the anticipated beginning of the first major trial, a grueling legal showdown meticulously documented in the judicial archives of New Jersey. Jayson Williams walked into that tense courtroom fighting for his absolute freedom, armed with a formidable, incredibly expensive defense team. But how do you defend a man when the physical evidence of a cynical cover-up is so overwhelmingly documented by the authorities? Was the defense strategy relying purely on his enduring celebrity status, or did they actually possess a genuine, game-changing technical revelation? According to the official transcripts of the hearings, the defense introduced highly specialized ballistics experts to testify under oath about a terrifying, alleged mechanical defect deeply hidden within the intricate lock mechanism of the weapon. They painted a compelling narrative of a tragic, unavoidable mechanical failure, directly shifting the blame away from the reckless athlete and onto the wealthy manufacturer of the firearm. On the completely opposite side of the aisle, the prosecution relentlessly hammered home the cold-blooded reality of the immediate aftermath. They utilized the sworn testimonies of the frightened guests to highlight the devastating attempt to destroy critical evidence while the victim was still on the floor. It was an absolute clash of legal titans, with the grieving family of Costas Christofi forced to endure every agonizing, graphic detail of that terrible February night. The atmosphere inside the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom was suffocatingly tense, building toward a final resolution that everyone assumed would be swift and decisive. However, the eventual conclusion reached by the exhausted jury would completely stun the eager public, plunging the former basketball star into a bizarre, extended legal limbo that would slowly drain his massive fortune over the next several years. The agonizing wait for a definitive conclusion finally shattered when the jury returned to the courtroom, delivering a highly complex and deeply frustrating result. According to the official protocol of the jury's decision released to the frantic press, Jayson Williams was definitively found guilty on 4 specific serious counts related directly to his calculated attempt to conceal the truth and destroy vital physical evidence. He could no longer hide behind the polished facade of an innocent, grieving host. The law had officially labeled him a convicted felon. But what about the absolute heaviest, most devastating charge hanging over his towering frame? Did the expensive, high-stakes gamble on the mechanical defect theory actually manage to sway the minds of ordinary citizens? As noted in the highly publicized post-trial public statements made by the jury foreman, the 12 individuals found themselves hopelessly divided on the primary charge of reckless actions leading to a fatal outcome, resulting in a completely paralyzed jury for that specific, crucial count. The prosecution immediately vowed to aggressively pursue a second comprehensive trial to secure a definitive, absolute conviction on the main charge. For Jayson Williams, this deeply ambiguous legal outcome was a terrifying double-edged sword. He had managed to temporarily avoid an immediate, lengthy prison sentence, but he was now officially trapped in a suffocating, incredibly expensive state of permanent legal limbo. And while the relentless prosecutors slowly and methodically gathered their piles of paperwork for round two, the isolated, heavily burdened former star watched his once glamorous personal life begin to aggressively unravel, setting the stage for a terrifying financial and emotional collapse as the year 2009 rapidly approached. The multi-year wait between the two grueling trials proved to be an absolute, crushing wait that completely shattered the final remnants of his gilded existence. Jayson Williams was a man entirely confined to his own echoing rural fortress, stripped of his lucrative television career and bleeding staggering amounts of cash every single day. According to the widely circulated public documents filed in the family court system, the year 2005 marked the devastating, highly publicized beginning of a bitter divorce process initiated by his wife. But was this purely the tragic end of a standard celebrity romance, or the desperate escape of a deeply frightened family, fleeing from a man entirely consumed by his own terrifying internal demons? As extensively detailed in the sharp financial analyses published by major sports and business media outlets, his legendary $86 million fortune was rapidly evaporating under the immense burden of legal fees paid to his elite defense attorneys. He was reportedly inching dangerously close to total financial ruin. Stripped of his beloved family and his immense wealth, he plunged headfirst into a dark, secretive spiral, heavily relying on potent, intoxicating substances to simply numb the endless, agonizing wait for the next court date. He became a towering ghost, a heavily burdened man wandering the empty halls of a house forever stained by a devastating tragedy. This suffocating isolation pushed his fragile psyche to the absolute breaking point, and by the spring of 2009, a frantic emergency call from an elite Manhattan hotel room would force heavily armed police officers to confront a man completely teetering on the edge of the abyss. The suffocating weight of an unresolved legal nightmare can shatter even the strongest minds. And for Jayson Williams, the breaking point arrived in a highly public, terrifying spectacle. According to the official dispatch logs of the New York Police Department, the crisis unfolded in the early morning hours of April of 2009, inside a lavish, heavily secured suite of an elite Manhattan hotel. The responding officers were not greeted by a charismatic sports analyst, but by a towering, deeply distressed man, violently destroying the expensive furniture around him. What triggers a wealthy, famous athlete to completely barricade himself in a hotel room, allegedly making dark, deeply concerning statements about ending his own suffering? Was it the crushing, inevitable realization that the second trial was looming, or the toxic, terrifying climax of his heavy reliance on intoxicating substances? As detailed in the sworn incident reports filed by the responding officers, the situation escalated so rapidly and dangerously that standard de-escalation tactics completely failed. The heavily armed police were forced to deploy an electronic stun device, bringing the massive, thrashing former superstar to the carpeted floor just to prevent a fatal outcome. the deeply disturbing sight of a beloved millionaire athlete being carried out on a stretcher and placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold sent absolute shockwaves through the sports community. He was a man completely empty, physically and mentally broken by his own terrifying choices. This horrific public meltdown clearly demonstrated to the relentless prosecution that their wealthy target was finally out of fight, paving the way for a dramatic courtroom surrender on the 11th of January, 2010, when he would finally utter the agonizing words they had waited 8 long years to hear. Faced with the terrifying prospect of another grueling trial and the very real possibility of spending decades locked in a tiny cell, the broken millionaire finally completely surrendered to the authorities. Based on the heavily scrutinized official court transcripts from the state of New Jersey, the defining moment occurred on January 11, 2010. Jayson Williams stood before a completely silent, packed courtroom and officially accepted a carefully negotiated plea agreement, publicly admitting his guilt in the tragic, reckless events that claimed a life inside his mansion. But did this sudden, highly emotional confession come from a place of genuine, soul-crushing remorse? Or was it simply the ultimate, calculated legal maneuver designed to minimize his inevitable time behind bars? As noted in the sworn affidavits and legal summaries of the hearing, he turned his massive frame to directly face the grieving family of the victim, delivering a tearful, trembling apology for the unimaginable pain he had caused. The presiding judge, staring down at the fallen giant of the basketball court, delivered a harsh, undeniable reality check. According to the official decree permanently entered into the public record, the sentence was a mandatory 5 years in state custody, with the absolute earliest possibility of parole firmly set at 18 months. The heavy steel handcuffs clicking around his massive wrists signaled the absolute, permanent end of his gilded existence. He was immediately stripped of his tailored suits and his staggering wealth and forcefully escorted out of the courtroom, preparing to step into the notoriously brutal, terrifyingly violent concrete corridors of the Rikers Island Correctional Facility, where his fading celebrity status would offer absolutely no protection. The brutal, terrifying transition from a 30,000-square-foot custom mansion to a tiny concrete cell is an absolute nightmare that very few wealthy individuals ever truly experience. According to the heavily restricted transfer documents filed by the Department of Corrections, the former rebounding king began his brutal sentence inside the notoriously dangerous high-security complex of Rikers Island. He was no longer Jayson Williams, the beloved basketball superstar. He was just another numbered inmate surrounded by the absolute harshest, most violent elements of society. How does a man who recently signed an $86 million contract mentally survive the daily, grinding reality of scheduled meals, constant threat of violence, and total, humiliating submission to armed guards? Was this terrifying environment exactly what he secretly needed to finally confront the dark, suffocating demons of his substance dependency? As extensively detailed in the prison visitation logs and later confirmed in his own public reflections, this incredibly harsh, unforgiving environment forced him into strict mandatory sobriety. He reportedly spent his long, agonizing days completely isolated from the toxic enablers of his past, participating in intensive prison labor programs and finding a renewed, desperate sense of faith. The official release paperwork generated by the parole board confirms that he ultimately spent exactly 27 grueling months entirely locked away from the outside world. He had paid his massive debt to society in the hardest way possible. But as the heavy electrified steel gates finally buzzed open in the spring of 2012, he stepped out into a completely changed, unfamiliar world that no longer had a place for him. Stepping back into the free world after 27 months of absolute confinement is a deeply jarring experience, especially when the entire globe remembers the exact, horrifying reason you were locked away. According to the heavily stamped official release documents filed by the State Parole Board, Jayson Williams officially walked out of the towering prison gates in April 2012. But where exactly does a disgraced, financially depleted former superstar go when the cheering arenas have been permanently replaced by glaring, judgmental stares from the public? Was he truly a completely reformed man, heavily humbled by the brutal daily reality of a concrete cell, or simply a highly skilled survivor desperately looking for a brand new angle to rebuild his shattered image? As extensively detailed in the public registration paperwork filed for nonprofit organizations a few years later, he made a highly unexpected, deeply personal pivot, establishing a specialized rehabilitation facility named Epiphany down in the warm climate of Florida. This specific, highly structured center was meticulously designed to assist fellow professional athletes heavily battling their own terrifying substance dependencies, utilizing his own catastrophic, highly publicized downfall as the ultimate, undeniable cautionary tale. He was reportedly dedicating his remaining time to pulling other struggling individuals back from the exact same dark abyss that nearly swallowed him completely. However, the heavy, lingering question continuously debated by seasoned sports commentators and legal analysts is whether such philanthropic actions can ever truly balance the cosmic scales of justice. Every single time he speaks to a struggling resident at his facility, he is forced to privately confront the absolute, terrifying reality of that fatal February evening. He may have successfully walked away from the heavy iron bars of the state correctional system, but the invisible, suffocating prison built by his own reckless actions on that tragic night will undeniably surround him for the rest of his breathing days. When you carefully examine the complete, staggering trajectory of this once glorious life, the sheer magnitude of the sudden collapse is absolutely terrifying to process. We witnessed a towering, incredibly gifted athlete who violently elbowed his way out of the tough city streets, soaring to the absolute, dizzying heights of $86 million contracts and primetime television fame. Yet, behind the heavily guarded iron gates of his sprawling, custom-built palace, the glittering American dream rapidly decayed into a chilling, deeply tragic nightmare of unbridled arrogance and profound internal struggles. The highly scrutinized legal documents, the heartbreaking sworn testimonies of terrified late-night guests, and the cold, unyielding forensic evidence all point directly to a man who truly believed his immense wealth could somehow miraculously alter the physical reality of a fatal mistake. He lived in a completely insulated bubble where the standard rules of society simply did not apply, until the deafening roar of a hunting weapon instantly shattered that illusion forever. But perhaps the most haunting, lingering mystery of this entire sweeping investigation is not about the specific, highly debated mechanical defect of a luxury firearm, nor the exact staggering amount of money bleeding from his bank accounts during the grueling trials. The ultimate chilling question that keeps seasoned investigators awake at night is much simpler, yet infinitely darker. If that heavy 12-gauge weapon had never been pulled from the illuminated glass display cabinet on that specific winter night, how long would it have taken for the massive, terrifying internal demons hiding inside Jayson Williams to completely destroy him anyway? The deafening roar of the packed stadium crowd has long since faded into absolute, heavy silence. But the devastating echo of that single, incredibly reckless choice continues to fiercely resonate, serving as a permanent, chilling reminder that the absolute darkest, most terrifying secrets are very often hidden right behind the brightest million-dollar smiles.